order. I think it's in the second or third chapter. It's on pages 45 and 50. I talk about a time when, with a group of friends, we spent a weekend praying through our lifespan for the healing of memories, for applying forgiveness to the past. We had actually all worked with Dr. Gary Sweeten's material, Breaking Free from the Past, as a small group in our church. And after working through his material, we went to his church for a weekend retreat. And when we came to the retreat consisted of breaking into small groups of 6 and simply praying for each other. There was a group facilitator who knew how to pray healing of memories prayers and had been trained in prayer. But basically, we went one by one and prayed for each person for about an hour and a half. And my life was changed during that prayer. I was so frightened to be prayed for that I waited until others had received prayers. I didn't get prayed for until Saturday afternoon. But what came together is the Lord brought all these memories that I had heard as a child, things my parents had said at the dinner table, things that I knew had actually happened, and brought them together all in one theme. And the theme was no room at the inn. It was the theme of rejection and being unwanted. And that had always been a theme in my life. And even at times now, I can feel like I'm on the outside of something when really I'm not. And I have to remind myself that's just an old habitual pattern that I feel on the outside, even though I'm really not. So this is what happened. We got together, and what happened is they laid hands on me and anointed me with oil, and I had a picture come up. And it was a picture of my mother and my half-sister. Now, my mother was a teenager during the outbreak of World War II in France, and when Germany occupied France, a lot of French teenage girls fell in love with German soldiers. It was not a political statement. It was just basically teenage folly. And that happened to my mother. And she fell in love with a man who was 10 years older than her, a German soldier, and she had a child with him, my half-sister Maurice. After the war, he abandoned them and didn't come back, and here she was with a half-German baby after World War II. My sister had red hair. Well, after World War II, they treated French girls who had children with German soldiers very harshly. They shaved their head, they spat on them, they urinated on them. Some of them had to go into hiding. And I remembered my mother saying to me that they had done that to her and my sister. And what came up was a picture from a Life magazine showing a collaborationist holding her German fathered child in her arms while she's being taunted. Now, my mother is with the Lord now, and she's entered into glory, but there was a sadness in her eyes that never left, that only really left when she was being prayed for. And when this picture came up, I started crying, and I didn't know where these tears were coming from. And I saw this picture from Life magazine, and I said, I see this picture from Life magazine. And then I made the connection. This happened to my mother. She told me this. And this is how a parent's sorrow can enter into a child. And I started crying, and I said, they spat on my mother, and they urinated on her and my half-sister. And this lady who was with me said, who? One of the female pastors from our church. And I said, her own people. And so she said, who are they? And I said, the French. And she said, well, can you forgive them? And I said, no, I can't. I hate them. Now, I had been fluent in French my entire life, but no one ever knew. My teachers were always shocked at parent-teacher conferences to find out that my mother was French, that I spoke French at home. I never let on that I was bilingual. I worked very hard to look and speak like an American. And so then someone said, you don't have to forgive them. The Lord in you can forgive them. release the forgiveness of the Lord. And I did, and I forgave the whole nation. And the minute I did that, another memory came up. It was the memory of my mother and father. And my dad is from Germany, and he married my mother when my half-sister was about 7 years old. And they had a child shortly after they were married. And they were trying to immigrate to the Americas because a German and a French marriage was not a good thing. And so, and they lived in a refugee camp where it was all German-French marriages trying to get out of Europe. It was in the Alsace-Lorraine area where they speak German and French. And it is in France, near a city called Montbéliard, in an old 19th century fort where they lived underground in basically dirt rooms that were used as bomb shelters. And that's where my brother was born, and that's where my brother died. And I heard my brother's name once the whole time I was growing up. And it's when my half-sister Marisa remembered, I think that it was his birthday and how cute he was. And I remember thinking, we have a brother? And then my father, in all his pain, said, those French doctors killed him. And they wouldn't give him the medication that he needed. Now, whether that is true or not, or just my father's pain at the loss of his son and everything he struggled as a German man, I don't know, after the war. But he believed that. And then I said, my father told me that my brother was killed and was denied medical help because he was half German. And then I remember saying, I still hate the French. And again, they said, can you forgive them? And I said, I still can't. Someone said, well, the Lord can do it through you. And again, I extended forgiveness. Then, the next memory I had was the first memory I actually have of my father, where I was born in Quebec, Canada. Now, this is 45 years ago, but Quebec is a beautiful place, but it's very French and it's very Catholic. We were German, and my father is Lutheran. And we were not welcome there because he was German and Lutheran. And the first memory I have is him coming home bloody. And he was an asbestos miner. And I remember saying in the prayer, all I remember of Canada is my father coming home beaten because he was German. And they said, can you forgive the French Canadians? And I said, I guess I can. I guess the Lord is with me. And all I was feeling was incredible sadness. Then the next memory I had was of us living in the U.S. And we had been living in the U.S. for, maybe a year or two. We had bought an old broken down station wagon. We're at a department store. And as we were coming out of the department store, there were some teenagers tampering with our car. And my father called out in his heavy, thick German accent to leave the car alone. And when they heard his accent, they said, go back to your own country. And he began to cry, which I had hardly ever seen. And his voice cracked and he said, this is my country. And tears were coming down his eyes. And when we got in the car, he just wept and wept and wept. And by that time, I was probably 6 years old. And I had a very sophisticated thought for a 6-year-old. I thought, wow, he's crying because his feelings are hurt. And so I had to forgive Americans. And then I just cried and I said, there's no room for us anywhere. It's just like Mary and Joseph. No room at the inn. No room at the inn. There's never a place for us. And they prayed for me, and they prayed for this generational sin of rejection to come up and out of me. And it happened because they consistently exhorted me, these prayer ministers, to forgive. And it was really the deepest healing I have ever received. And what was so important was that there was Dolores Wensler, this pastor at our church, and there were some other people from my small group, and my community was with me. And that made a difference because they knew me. They met with me week in, week out. And And on the way home, I was still weeping, and I didn't tell anyone this for years. But on the way home, I saw a demonic presence hover over me, and it was the most self-piteous and pitiful looking demonic thing I'd ever seen. And I heard the Lord say, just tell it to go away. And I said, be gone in Jesus' name. And it was gone. And there is such a thing as I think a spirit of self-pity that can come in our wounds that we have to vigilantly renounce or rebuke or cast out if in the presence of the Lord it rears its ugly head. And it is there in the presence of the Lord. If it's there, it will show its ugly head. Don't worry, you don't have to go looking for demons of self-pity. They will show themselves if you are in Jesus' presence, if you are practicing his presence. Well, I'll tell you after that sense of anticipation of rejection, I practically elicited rejection from other people because I had so much rejection in me. It lifted completely. It's not that I don't still have this propensity to somehow at times perceive rejection when it's not happening. It's just that now I can stop myself. Oh, that's that old thing. That's that old groove in my soul that was sort of somehow, wrought in there through years and years of sin. But I don't have to believe it. And the fact that I can objectify it and not go there, that's the work of the Spirit. Now, this is where I think most healing of memories occurs, friends, is in these obvious memories. Suppressed memories do need to be dealt with when they come up. But as I said earlier, we cannot access repressed memories at will. We simply do not remember them. And if you're with a very fine therapist who has had a long-term relationship with you and thinks that there may be a repressed memory there, in that therapeutic relationship, it's possible that that therapist can actually help you access such a memory. But the danger, friends, is this. You may place all your healing in the hope that one day I'm going to find that magic bullet, that repressed memory, that once it comes up, everything is going to fall into place for me. Don't go there. That is magical thinking. That is presumption. And God can do so much healing in you, and if a repressed memory is going to come up, it's going to come up and it's going to surprise you. Like if you've ever taken a test and you can't remember the answer, but you did the studying, and you try real hard to remember it, well, it's not going to come up, is it? Just go on to the next question. Then at the end of the test, it suddenly comes up the minute you're not thinking about it. And that's how you need to treat the possibility of a repressed memory in your soul. If it's there, it will come up, and probably at the most inopportune time. Now, there are a variety of barriers, at least 5 barriers, to the healing of memories, and therefore to truly forgiving others. One is when the offense is very deep. When evil has visited a home, and when the need is not even truly for forgiveness, but really to acknowledge evil was here, and what I need to pray for is a prayer of deliverance in the Lord's Prayer, but deliver us from evil, not teach us to forgive evil. And there is a difference between the prayer of deliverance from evil and the prayer of forgiveness of sins. You can forgive someone's sin, but you might also need to pray to be delivered from the evil that came through that person or that circumstance. For example, in dealing with someone who has been sexually abused by someone who was supposed to be an affectionate authority figure, for example, that is so traumatic. It is not simply that that person sexually abused them. They can forgive that, but why do they keep returning to it? Because in the moment of that abuse, there was evil that came against the person. There is a presence of evil that came there. And when we are in the presence of evil, one of the things that happens is we have to somehow disengage from that evil. And what we do is we depart from reality through a psychological defense called dissociation. And dissociative experiences occur on a variety of levels. Everything from, a child sitting in front of a television set and you're saying, "Billy, time for dinner," and Billy can't hear you, to the person who's been sexually abused, and they dissociate from the experience to the degree that they only have a hazy recollection that it happened, or maybe even they do completely repress it. And what people used to call multiple personality disorder is now called dissociative identity disorder. This is someone who has had a variety of experiences where they dissociated, and this has become sort of a habitual pattern in their personality to dealing with conflict. Or, I think, in the presence of evil, what most people do is that when they do not have a way of processing it, they detach from it in a slightly dissociative way. This is how, the first time I came to understand this, I was in seminary, and the registrar at our seminary, a lovely lady, was interviewing someone. And in the interview, the person said something to her about herself that was so shocking and vile, she dissociated. And she came to me, I saw her in the parking lot, and she looked kind of dazed. And she was carrying her car keys, and I said to her, "What happened? What's wrong with you?" And she says, "Oh my goodness, how did I get here?" I said, "What do you mean?" And she says, "I was just in my office interviewing someone, and suddenly I'm here at my car, and I don't remember walking from my office to my car." And I said, "So what happened?" I said, "Who were you talking with?" And she says, "Well, I was talking with so-and-so," and then suddenly it came to her. He had said something to her that was so remarkably shocking and vulgar that she had no way of processing it, and she just kind of went into a haze. It was really a minor form of dissociation. And it was evil. And I'm quite convinced that the person either was demonized or was under a demonic impression himself or something, but that's how she reacted to it. That is the experience that most people have in their first exposure to pornography, especially when it's as a child. They cannot fathom what it is they're seeing, and there is this sense of being in unreality, and they go into a haze. And it was as the Lord was healing me that I realized that all my acting out in homosexuality, for the most part, had a dissociative quality to it. I was in a haze, and I did so much of it as if I was outside my body observing it, and sometimes it was only after an encounter that I thought, "Oh my goodness, what have I been doing?" And I think that's how a lot of people experience their brokenness. That when they're acting out in their brokenness, they are in a partially dissociative state, and so that they're somehow disconnected from reality itself. Excuse me. Now, that's a lot to say about the offense is so deep, but that's when evil really comes against us. Then, this is when the offense is so deep. Then there are other barriers. Let's go back to this. When we are out of touch with our own hearts, when we can't say, "I love you" to someone, that's a pretty easy way to access. Am I out of touch with my own heart? Do I have a hard time saying "I love you"? And sometimes when we can't say that to another person and really can't allow that affection to come forward in us, it's because we are out of touch with what's there in our heart. We're in denial still, quite possibly. Or there's a real split between our head and our heart, and we live in our head. If we have not settled the sin question insofar that we have resolved not to act out in our sinful behaviors, it's not to say that people won't have slips, but it is to say that we have come before the Lord in sincerity and have repented, have turned, have contrition and sadness over the sin itself. And so repentance, that dual aspect of repentance, that it's both that sense of contrition and that need to turn. If we haven't gotten to that place, then we will revert back into our sin the first time a negative feeling comes up, because we're going to soothe our pain with our sinful behavior. And we have to let go of that sinful behavior so that we don't soothe the pain, so that we feel the pain, and that in the moment of feeling the pain, we can ask the Lord, what relationship is this pain rooted in? Who do I need to forgive, or who do I need to ask forgiveness of? And then if we are still under the law, if we're still under the law, we will not receive forgiveness. Then we're still trying to be good enough on our own. We need to fully say, Lord, I really cannot forgive others unless you are with me, unless I cling to your cross. And it is only by your cross that I myself am forgiven of sin. Perfectionism can be an indication of being under the law. And then when we're stuck in narcissism, and we all have narcissism, we may believe that we're both saint and sinner at the same time, but we really don't live that out. We still live our life out that every time there's a conflict, it's really that other person's fault. We're still deflecting blame, and that is one of the hallmarks of narcissism. That's basically what Adam and Eve do in the garden. God says to Adam, did you eat from the tree that I told you not to eat of? He should say, yes, I did. But he says, that woman, the one you put here with me, she gave me some, then I ate it. So he blames her twice and throws a jab up at God. You put her here, and then I did it. And so that is the fallen nature. We deflect blame. I have never met anyone who didn't do it, myself included. If you don't think you do it, we should talk later, friends. And you have to say, I do this, Lord, please. And when you finally get to that place where you say that, then you start asking yourself, okay, it's not their fault. Maybe they have some responsibility, but what responsibility do I own here? And then that's where the Lord can show you. This is where there is sin. Maybe in your heart, maybe sin that came against you. Now, what do we do when the Lord reveals a memory that needs to be healed? Well, we bind and loose. We receive forgiveness and give forgiveness. We will pray atonement